on the server. Evening all. I thought we should continue look at a few other interesting Petrosian games this week. I hope the board is okay. For those on live stream, is the board okay? It seems to be okay. Okay. Right. So hi everyone on chess-based server and on livestream.com/Kingscrusher. So I've selected some key Petrosian games to look at this week to carry on from last week, and this is the first one. I want to give you a quotation which I found interesting from Petrosian. Petrosian is quoted as saying, "A strong player knows all the rules and laws of the game. A talented player knows everything that a strong player knows, but he also sees exceptions to the rules. But major chess talents, we call them geniuses, gradually transform these exceptions into new rules, and so on ad infinitum. Since chess is inexhaustible, Tigran Petrosian is quoted as having said that." That's quite interesting because the hypermoderns were interested in finding exceptions to rules. So Petrosian's kind of echoing the difference between the classical, positional players and the hypermoderns. Really, if you can find useful exceptions all the time, then you're differentiating yourself usefully. So anyway, let's have a look at this game in 1945. So d4, and Tigran plays knight f6. Now c4, and now d6, which someone in my league actually plays. Steve Swanson he played this actually once or twice against me. So it's not to go into a king's engine or anything. It's for a quick e5, offering a seemingly dull, exchange of queens. If white wants to play for an exchange of queens, but it's not actually that good to play d takes e. It's not actually the main line, but white plays it in this game, d takes e, and it should give black a good game, because although black forfeits the right to castle here, black can play c6, get the king here, and make use of the dark squares. This bishop's quite good on this diagonal. And potentially, a5, knight a6, this sort of stuff is good positionally for black. So white plays bishop g5, and then we have c6. So c6 solves many of the concerns that the player with black pieces might have. That d5 square, okay, there's an accelerated casting with check you might think is dangerous, and white uses that, but it's no big deal, as this game actually I think is going to demonstrate. So we castle with check, so white's going with the idea of just being quite forcing moves. But as we know, forcing moves are not always good moves. King c7, if we look at the actual state of the position here, white's dark square grip is not that hot here. Black's got two lovely bishops actually striking down usefully. This knight can go to a6 as well as d7 to ic5. So knight f3, and actually the knight does go to d7 to protect this pawn, of course. Now a3, the first non-forcing move from white. But now there's an immediate problem thrown at white. Tigran plays a forcing move, forcing the defense of the f2 pawn. Okay, so bishop h4. Player writes, "I would love to play queen takes d8 as white." This isn't a good line, supposedly. Black's doing very well from this position. I don't know what you guys think, if you don't believe me or whatever, but black has a very good position in this queenless position here, in my opinion. f6 blunts the scope of the bishop. h3, kicking the knight back, and now to h6. There's nothing wrong with any black piece really here. It's very cohesive with the pawn structure. G4, okay, as though, you know, this pawn chain is going to be undermined with G5. Knight F7, Bishop G3, pointing ominously, it seems, at the black king. Now A5, okay, and white now uses the pin on this E5 pawn with his next move, playing Knight D4. But is it actually such a big deal? Some tactical threats, but you know, Knight B5 or Knight F5, this doesn't really do anything. White's only got the rook blasting down the file, so it's no big deal. Knight C5 keeps the safeguard anyway of the F5 square. E3, and now centralizing move Knight D6. So the knight is attacked because this pawn's been unpinned now, so the knight's really attacked. It moves to C2. Knight DE4, and now we see some superiority of a more centralized knight after takes. This knight looks better than this one. This bishop still looks a bit blunted. These bishops still look beautiful, to me at least. This one's got a clear target. H5 is a clear target. White's created some weaknesses in the position here, especially this G4. Okay. G4 is actually fixed, frozen, before being undermined now. White can't play bishop H2 because knight takes F2, winning the exchange. He plays bishop H4, which looks strange, just to provoke G5. G5 is played anyway because it does fix down G4 now. And now, of course, this rook is very useful, of course, with H5. So black's clearly outplayed white positionally. Would you all agree with that? That white stands here with a miserable position indeed. All agree? Or anyone disagree? Feel free to disagree, but you know, maybe say why. Just white hasn't really got, you know, this bishop is blocked in by its own pawn. This knight's kind of passive on C2. Look, it hasn't got squares. It hasn't got squares. The pieces have not got good squares. Look at black's pieces, they've got squares, they've got scope. It's got a fixed target. Even the rook is active, useful. So black clearly stands better, in my opinion. G takes H5, reveals another target, the H3, on the semi-open file. But knight takes G3 first, and now rook takes H5. So H3's being victimized now. Black can look forward to piling up on H3. Okay. Bishop G2. Bishop E6. Hitting C4 as well. Just needs to get the bishop out of the way somewhere. Maybe can carry on putting more pressure on H3. Three pieces will be targeting H3 pretty soon. Bishop F1 protecting C4. Now A4, which is a bit of a committal decision, because doesn't the rook want to come here later? Is this pawn going to be vulnerable? Is B4 going to be a bit weaker? Well, it does fix down against B4, so it's trying to cement these pawns, you know, lock them down. Rook D2. And now look at this beautiful C5 square, which has always been available to black, is used now, Bishop C5. So tying down white a bit more. White doesn't bother defending now, it counterattacks with Rook F2. Actually, the pawn is in any case defended by the knight, that's one useful thing. So forget that. The bishop just looks good on C5, just tying the knight down in effect. F5. Okay, the rooks are going to double soon. Now they double. So what we have here is coordination and maybe potential for F4 with this pin on this poor pawn against the rook. And this happens, crunch time is about to begin. F4. So that both these bishops are striking heavily into the white position. The rooks are beautifully placed. King's safe here. G4. And now the time is ripe to extend the advantage of the position. Something I said many times in YouTube videos is strategic crush is a major goal, and sometimes to increase your advantage, if you think you're winning strategically or you have an advantage, sometimes positional sacrifice takes your position to the next level. And here it's a positional sacrifice which is about to take Petrosian's position to the next level. So I wonder if you can guess what Tigran played here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay? Anyone? What was Tigran's next move here? Not f takes e3. Anyone else? Someone's mentioned rook h3. Yeah. Rook h3. Positional sacrifice. It's undermining White's pawn structure, of course, because that's the base of the mini pawn chain here. g4 will be weaker. So bishop takes h3, rook takes h3, and of course there's more pressure on this pawn as well. So these pawns are a bit looser, and these bishops are a bit better, really, because they've got these targets. It's already a pawn for the exchange, and it's going to be 2 pawns for the exchange soon. The pawn structure, in trying to understand the positional sacrifice and what it does, what does it actually do? Why does it add even more value to pieces to sometimes theoretically sacrifice material, to theoretically lose material, but with the potential of gaining even more material? I think what's happened is the pawn structure here is favouring these pieces heavily, because these are just weak pawns. So if you can create this situation where you sacrifice the exchange and the opponent is left with weak pawns, and it's 1 pawn for the exchange with the prospect of 2 pawns for the exchange, shows actually that your pieces have higher quality than before the positional sacrifice. And White's pieces, by contrast, the quality of those pieces have been damaged in some respect. That these are passive rooks here, if we sort of check their quality, and this is a passive knight. Everything's quite passive because of these weak pawns. In fact, they're just tied down. So it's going to be 2 pawns for the exchange pretty soon now. King d3, and now 2 pawns for the exchange. Bishop takes e3, and with that bishop takes e3, we've got pawn structure mobility now. These guys are going to go forward soon. Knight takes check, and another pawn drops. 3 pawns for the exchange is absolutely huge, absolutely huge. And still coordination between rook and bishop, and pass pawns ready to be pushed, connected pass pawns. So gigantic compensation for the exchange. So I hope you're all convinced so far by the idea that sometimes you reach a good position and the positional sacrifice is a logical way to further your position, because this looks absolutely crushing from the position we had before. White exchange tries to get rid of the rooks, but it's no good. Just e4, and here White realizes the helplessness of his position. E3, and then if rook moves there, then bishop d5, and if f3 f2, the bishop's guiding the f pawn. So White resigns here. So we see a logically flowing positional sacrifice in this game. If we just rewind back here, would you guys have naturally considered in your own games rook takes h3? Because look at the pawn structure, how it feeds the pieces after. Even though technically you're losing a bit of material, it's the prospects which have massively increased for gaining much more material, for gaining a second and even a third pawn for the exchange down. So even though White's the exchange up, it's just the quality difference of the pieces. The opponent was Aghanalean. I'll put the PGNs in the YouTube video when I upload to YouTube later. So that was a nice one. Let's have a quick overview and summary. This is a very interesting system to play with the black pieces. Does anyone know the name of it? This quick e5. The player there's Metinov also played this sometimes. I've forgotten what the name of this opening is. It's sort of a little bit like an Old Indian. Is it Old Indian territory? Inviting a queen exchange? There might be a specific name for it. It's not quite Old Indian, is it? Modern defence, Stefan23 is saying. Yeah, but it's this idea that once you get the advantage, there's this dynamism aspect that comes in, where you can often sacrifice to further your position. So where were the positional advantages accumulated? I think from this opening, even though White's playing forcing moves, Black's got a very good dart square strategy, because as soon as White played d takes, he was liberating this bishop across this diagonal. So, you know, these forcing moves are actually not particularly great. And in fact, you know, this g4 square as well for the knight, you know, f7 is not a problem with, you know, with knight g5, but knight g4 is a problem for f2. So, you know, Black had a great position here already from the opening. Absolutely great. And this f6 is really reinforcing the centre. And, you know, the white bishop's quality was already going downhill here. The quality of the white bishops. And a clear target for, of course, restraining that pawn later and targeting this pawn chain. The seeds of destruction already being sown here. So a5 clamping down also on White's queenside pawns later soon, with a4 coming up pretty soon later in the game. But basically the quality difference is also increasing here, with the knight quite aggressive on e4. So White's already been outplayed straight from the opening. And what we have is a logical flow, a positional sacrifice, which intensified and furthered Black's advantages. So Black had a fantastic opening position, restraints on both sides of the board, and now mounting pressure on h3 with f4 to support coordination of three pieces against that poor h3 pawn. So g4, and we've got to be brave sometimes and think, you know, it's a logical thing to change the configuration of the pawn structure and sacrifice material, knowing that your prospects are massively increased, the positional exchange sack. So this is a really, you know, just a lost position, it seems, for White. So he's going 2 pawns down for the exchange, and now it's 3 pawns after this bishop takes c4. Okay, so with these 2 connected passed pawns, White resigned. Okay, let's go on to another game. Okay, this is Snilga versus Petrosian, Leningrad, Russia, 1946. Okay, so solid opening is chosen by Tigran, the caro-kann, d4, d5, and now White takes on d5, and bishop d3. This is a system which is not as aggressive as the Panov-Botvinnik system with c4. The white pawn's going to come to c3, and White is trying to lock in this bishop to prompt Black to play e6 to lock in the bishop and use this e5 square, you know, later castle and use e5. That's going to be the iron grip for White sometimes, to play on the e5 square. Knight f6. But Tigran refuses actually to keep this bishop locked in. He's waiting for knight f3 so he can play bishop g4. So he plays knight c6 with a bit of a waiting move, putting pressure on d4. But actually now he just plays bishop g4 immediately. Knight f3. a6. Now a6 signifies often against this very solid structure that it can be fragmented with a minority attack later. And the idea of the minority attack is to sort of create isolated pawn and a backward pawn on the semi-open E file. So there'll be pawn structure damage from a minority attack. The minority of pawns here, the 2 pawns here, are attacking the majority of pawns. Hence it's called minority attack. That's one strategic plan based on pawn structure. So E6, but for the moment both sides carry on developing. White has a solid position. Now F5 is interesting because if an exchange of light square bishops can occur, then white will be slightly weaker on the light squares. These light squares will be slightly weakened. So knight E7 has got the idea, exchange off the light square bishops. Knight E5, bishop F5. Okay, so a strategic bishop exchange. White willingly accepts this. He plays F4, and okay, with F4 we've committed to more pawns on dark squares, which are the same colour as this bishop, and this is the more valuable bishop, which is just traded off now. So bishop takes D3, knight takes D3, and a lovely blockade square results. F5, a juicy knight on F5. So again, we can say the opening for black so far has been a good success here. Black has very good pieces with the pawn structure already. Bishop F2. And there might be potentially one day a threat of G4, but it's not at the moment. The knight covers it. Bishop F2 seems a passive move. Bishop E7. It's just getting out of the way of an exchange. Knight E5. Okay, rook moves to E8. So what is Tigran up to here? He's still... Now after this knight E5, G4 is supported. And it is used. It's slightly weakening though. Why does white want to do this without the light square bishop? He's created some weaknesses. And our knights centralised like in the previous game. Tigran's improved his knights. They're going to be better quality than the opponent's knights pretty soon. This one's chased. Bishop F8. So he's got better minor pieces. And white's got potential weaknesses. Although he's trying to hack black one day, but it's a bit ambitious. He's a bit of a hacker, it seems. Iron Tigran gets an iron grip on the position, literally, with F5. So this iron knight on E4, reinforced by the other knight. Okay, he's giving up a bit of control of E5 though. G5, and now G6, which means also bishop G7 might be on the cards later. Knight E5. Now black, if he hasn't got too many tactical issues to consider here, it's only the queen and the rook and the knight. Can he defend H7? If he can defend H7, he can carry on with the minority attack plan. So Queen C7 defends H7 laterally. It's also attacking C3, which might be useful for the minority attack plan. So Queen C7 is attack and defense. You might also consider the dynamic possibilities of Rook H3 and Knight G6 for Queen H8. That has to be factored in. So in this position actually though, White didn't bother playing Rook H3. I mean it's protected anyway. If Knight G6 was a threat, well maybe just no, I think we need to have a look at this. The move played in the game was actually Queen E1. Okay, let's suppose Rook H3 was played. Is this a big threat? Knight takes G6. How do we parry this out of interest? How would you say Tigran would have parried this threat of Knight takes G6 if indeed that is a threat? It does seem to be a threat because of check, then bringing the rook in and then trying to win the queen. Maybe just Queen G7 stops everything. What do you think? Or maybe there's a stronger move here. Any suggestions here? I'd say Queen G7 might be enough. Might be an idea. Okay. Alright. But so White retreated the Queen anyway. Okay. So minority attack time. B5. This pawn structure is a fixed target. Just ready for this, breakthrough to break it down. So H4, he's trying to use his pawns to sort of batter the pawn structure. Knight F7, trading off this knight now, because that's going to put pressure on G6. King G2, now he takes it off. And he carries on with the minority attack plan. He plays A5. So it's going to be supporting B4. Queen E2 and now B4. Actually, there was a Magnus Carlsen Blitz game recently on YouTube, and Magnus is playing a lovely minority attack. When White plays solidly like this is a big downside of this fixed pawn structure with this pawn on C3. It often represents a minority attack target. So the bishop tries to assist in White's pawn chain with bishop D4. Okay, defending C3. Pressure is increased. Rook EC8. So we've got a lot of pressure increasing on C3 positionally. And now even more. How do we even more victimize C3 here? There's an undermining operation underway here. And it carries on with the move A4, because black wants to play A3 to undermine the base of the pawn chain, which is B2. So this is getting to be a critical position on the queen side. The queen side seems to be collapsing here, and White's got no real attack on the H file. It's a bit too slow. So he takes on E4, and he tries to get the H file attack maybe with Rook H3, as if something might happen. But now his queen side's collapsing. A3. Which is going to be a faster attack here. White opens up the H file and plays Rook C1. The pawn chain is now definitely collapsing. AB2. And we've got fragmentation. Isolated. On the file. Pressure on A2 now, Queen C4, threatening immediately Rook A2. It starts to look a bit nasty now. Rook C2. And now Rook A3. Okay, what's the idea of Rook A3? Maybe, black can consider putting more pressure on A2 or something else perhaps. Now Rook E3. And there's a little combination played by Tigran to break White down on the queen side. I wonder if you can guess the little combination now, combinatory move played here. If I give you 10 seconds, starting from now. Anyone? Little mini combination. Anyone? Okay. Rook takes A2, just temporarily giving up the rook to play B3 to get it back. So he's got rid of one pair of rooks in effect from the little combination. But even worse now, he's winning a whole piece with Queen takes D4. Queen takes D4 because it's a nasty pin on C2. So actually, it wasn't just an exchange of rooks. It was just like winning completely. So that little combination is destructive. Rook takes A2, completely destructive combination. So really, White, that he couldn't, really take this without Queen D4. Really, he shouldn't have really taken that. So here, it's the last move really wasn't needed. So this position. So we've just had the minority attack, which gives black a little advantage. And again, dynamism comes to sort of take the position to the next level. A little temporary sacrifice here. So why is the position taken to the next level? Because defensive resources are taken out of white's position. The c-file pressure is evident, and the little combination here is just getting rid of key defensive resources. And he can't allow the pawn to queen or anything, because then again, queen d4 is always going to be a threat for c1 queening. So this is now a major threat for queening the pawn if the pawn's left there. Okay. So queen takes c2, queen takes d4, queen b3. So black's just a piece up, queen d5. Piece up. It's plain sailing, it should be. White should be resigning soon, or does he have a cheapo on the king side here? Not really. Check. Check. It looks pretty vicious. And Tigran, is he going to invite some sort of cheapo with queen b7? He does play e2. And after queen b7, he knocks white out with this killer check here, queen f1 check. Because next move is going to be mate. It's pretty quick. He doesn't have to queen the pawn. He can just mate white. Splat. Queen g1 mate. So that was a logical progression for minority attack on the queen side. A strategic exchange of light square bishops. Let's run through that again. So a rock solid caro-kann performance in this game. And one downside of white's plan here is emphasized that this structure is actually a sitting target later for minority attack. So positionally, it was positional crush, strategic crush, exchanging off the light square bishop. White's attack really didn't achieve much, just created a few weaknesses on the king side. Black's piece quality is quite high. So basically, white didn't really have much counterplay now pretty soon. Look at the quality of all these pieces working together on the queen side. Intense pressure. And there's a question, sorry, why not 36 rook takes a2? So we're going to get to that. Why not 36 rook takes a2? Oh, sorry. That's what happened in the game. Oh, no, rook a3 was played in the game. So that becomes a good question. Could rook takes a2 have been played here, in fact? Possibly. So in the game, rook a3 was played. So rook a2 immediately. Interesting. Saying b3. I think, don't we have queen a7 here? Because the rook is still on h, threatening mate. Doesn't work there. So you know when he tempted rook e3, the rook was away from h7. Does that answer the question, Klabniks? Klabniks. I think that's why he timed it well. So this move, rook a3, is putting more pressure on c3, and he tempted rook e3, so that's away from h7. So now it works much better, this combination. Okay, so let's have a look at another game. Hope you got something from that one. Shorter game, this one. We see an attacking side to Tigran. Or do we? attacking positional. Okay, so Tigran playing white will flip the board. D4. Okay, and Victor elects in 1946 Leningrad tournament. He elects for the bit of a dodgy stone wall system. So what's the problem with this stone wall? The problem with the stone wall is usually the dark squares are a bit weakened. So if you can trade off this bishop strategically, you've got access to these dark squares. Particularly e5 and c5 are quite central. So you want to knock out this bishop and you want to get knights perched on these squares, usually. Okay, strategic plan. Castles, bishop d6, c4, c6. Okay, so this bishop is very valuable here. This bishop's blocked in. Sometimes it can zigzag out, you know, bishop d7 like this. Sometimes. b3. So preparing this strategic bishop exchange to knock out this bishop. Castles, and now bishop a3. No attempt was made by black actually to play a move. He could have played queen e7, but then, you know, white could play a4 to try and force through bishop a3. So he just let it happen, bishop a3. And Victor took on a3 and played queen e8 with attacking intentions, you know, queen h5, you know, hack the white king. So black's playing like a hacker. So how is this punished? This impudence from black. Okay, so queen c1 has two ideas, maybe queen a3 and queen g5. An exchange of queens might take some sting out of any potential black attack. Knight e4 actually stops queen g5, the knight's holding up, and also maybe coming in here as a threat. Knight ce1, so that stops any knight c3s, and the knight can reroute to eye this central key dark square. So two tick boxes there, a weakened dark square and a central square. Very important, e5 in this variation to control it. Black lashes out now on the king side, like in the previous game. Petrosian is faced with all these hackers that are playing all these pawn moves to try and get to his king. He's trying to play, you know, decent, solid positional chess, and he has to put up with all this. You know, g5. But no, that's what the stone wall's designed for, the attack, quite often. It is positionally compromising on the dark squares. Knight d3. Knight d7, and now knight does perch on e5 finally. So it looks as though white's play is very thematic here. All he's done is a strategic bishop exchange so far, and he's perched the knight securely on e5. Is this bishop better than that one? I mean, this bishop is still locked in by this pawn chain though. This kind of pawn triangle is quite solid. King h8, but now the knight's kicked with f3. And now white plays e4 actually. And it looks as though the bishop's scope is going to be extended. He's going to try and blast through this triangle in the centre if black's not careful. And Victor wasn't interested in taking on e4 here. Let's have a quick look why that might be the case. So takes. Now let's just say knight takes. Is this a total disaster? I assume it might be. But how exactly? How? Possibly. Should we go with bishop e4? I can't see it here. Maybe knight takes d7. Knight e5. Temporarily, okay, pawn up, but this knight's huge. Chop on d7 and chop on e4, someone says. Player. This looks like a huge position anyway. As well. Let's go through that again. D takes e4. F takes. Knight takes. Chop on d7. But then bishop takes d7. And then chop on e4. We reach the same position, don't we? I think the idea is just knight e5. This knight's just better than the bishop. Don't we just reach this position? In this position, say black. Actually, black's in trouble. Bishop e8, there's rook takes. And if rook takes, queen takes. And the queen is threatening to come in with queen f6 check. So this looks absolutely diabolical. This position. Rook f1, end of game. And he's also got queen e6 as well. So that looks diabolical. So maybe that's why Victor didn't like his position at this point. After e4, he played knight f7. Now, we have c takes d5. So the queen's actually useful for c-file infiltration. Knight takes, d takes, c takes, e takes. Have you noticed this pawn triangle has been evaporated? It's gone. Bang. Now f4, extending the scope of the bishop, is now hitting d5 and reinforcing the e5 pawn. And although this bishop's been given some scope, we've got a queen which can come to c7. This bishop's beautiful on the diagonal. So white has increased his advantage. Where is black's attack? It's nowhere still. Rook d8, poorly defending that poor pawn. And it looks grim actually now. It looks really positionally grim. Queen c7. Nasty. Horrible pressure. b6. So, you know, black hasn't connected rooks yet. F takes g5. So, of course, if knight takes, then the queen can take the rook. And if queen takes, then the queen can take the knight. So this fg5 is a bit of a pain. Bishop a6. And now just the knight uses that f4 square, knight f4, winning a piece. Just winning a piece. Because the queen, you know, has forced the move. It can't go there because of the knight. And then queen takes f7. So here Victor actually just resigned. So it was a very smooth positional win, this game. Player writes, random observation. In Petrosian games, the pawns slowly walk forward. In Tal games, Tal catches the enemy king in the centre. Yeah. This was... We could describe this game as a Dutch defence Stonewall nightmare. Would you agree? This is a bit of the nightmare Stonewall game. White's moves look all very, very thematic and logical. Hard to sort of find an improvement for White's play. Even this, you know, knight c2 crawling to the centre looks logical, because this is the most important key square. Once you've weakened these dark squares, you could say that e5 is the most critical central key square here on the dark square. So the hack attack, queen c1, dual purpose. Three ways later, as we discover that the queen's actually useful on the c file for infiltration to c7 later. So it's hard to criticise any of White's moves. Knight e1, rerouting to the centre. Knight fe5. Now the f knight means f3 and e4 is going to blast this triangle to bits pretty soon. So e4, temporary pawn sacrifice used with huge effect, which wasn't dared to be accepted. So black's busted if he accepts it or not, maybe. He doesn't accept it. He tries to sort of keep his position intact, but it's getting blown to shreds after c takes d5. So he took on e5. I don't know if there's anything better. D takes e. E takes. Just looks as though White's got beautiful pieces here All his pieces are beautiful. And the queen infiltration, very crushing, just winning material here. It's a poor configuration of pieces. So I hope you enjoyed that one. Okay, so that was 1946, Dutch Stonewall disaster. Let's have a look at another game. Okay, so Petrosian playing black in this game against Dunave in USSR Championship of 1946. Sicilian defence, and we have here a Scheveningen, an immediate e6 Scheveningen pawn centre. So you've got to be careful as white. You know, these liberating breaks in the centre at all times need to be monitored. Bishop e2. After a6, white clamps down on black playing b5. Actually, I was asked just last night. There was a bishop e2 Sicilian game last night in our club match. I said usually the strategy with bishop e2, which is a favourite of Karpov, white is trying to prevent black's breaks of d5 and b5. That was what I said last night. You know, sometimes the bishop can go to f3 to help d5. Okay, so bishop e7, bishop e3, queen c7. Looks fairly standard stuff. And now Tigran's content with b6. Okay, so he's going to put his bishop to ie4, f4, bishop b7, bishop f3. Looks all fairly standard and logical for both sides so far. Knight d7. So he hasn't castled yet, no need at the moment to castle. He can exert more pressure on the semi-open c-file, rook c8. And now another hacker. What is this with his opponents? g4, but this is more justified because it is a Sicilian. You expect these cut and thrust moves like g4 in the Sicilian. So how does Tigran react to this? How can he knock white out or destabilise white here? He plays knight c5 actually. So he's putting more pressure on that e4 pawn. So there's going to be no knight retreat needed if black can take on e4. It's got a lot of pressure there already. So white takes on c5. And now capture towards the centre, b takes c. Okay. So g5 is forcing a knight retreat. And now a5. So if black castles, surely white can sort of try and arrange maybe an attack later. Crude stuff could occur. Is he in a rush to castle here? No. He's focusing on here in white's centre. e4 again could be a concern to try and undermine. So rook b8, bishop c6. So this carries the idea that maybe, rook b4 is going to be useful to try and attack the white centre. Of course, also rook b2 might be a threat. So knight a4 defends b2 and maybe is wanting to come into b6 at some point. Not at the moment. Rook b4, hitting the knight, of course. White defends it with b3. Now we've got a good position. Has black actually got an advantage? Interesting. What would you play here with black if I give you 10 seconds? Is there any strategic kind of positional sacrifice you might consider here with the black pieces? So 10 seconds starting from now. Anyone? Right, is this pawn actually in pre with bishop e4? And someone said rook e4. First of all, can black actually just play bishop e4 here? Possibly there's the move c3. Then if bishop takes f3, c takes, and you still got a rook that's in pre. I'm not sure if this is going to be dangerous coming in against the squares here. That looks quite dangerous as well, to be honest, this position. So what would happen after bishop takes e4? In the game, actually, the exchange sat rook takes e4 was played. But let's just quickly observe this. Bishop takes e4. Would we say that c3's the move here to play? Or is anything much simpler? Anyone? What would be the refutation of bishop takes e4 here? Bishop takes, rook takes. Can't see it. I think c3 must be the move, surely. So bishop takes c3. Bishop takes. C takes. Bishop goes back. I'm not sure. I mean, this looks dangerous as well for queen c6. What does white play here in this position? Looks dangerous for the king. So someone said, okay, a different idea of taking first on e4 and then playing c3, right? Yeah, because you don't really want a battery on your light squares, do you, around the king? Possibly, but you know, is the rook actually, can the rook be useful if you play d5? That's interesting to consider anyway. Okay, if someone wants to sort of do engine analysis on that, that would be interesting. In the game, the exchange sack rook takes e4 was played, which again, you know, creates weaknesses. If white's going to take, he's creating weaknesses around his king. So he didn't actually take. He played c4. So black's just won seemingly a valuable centre pawn for nothing. h6 now. And, you know, this rook can also be targeting the white king soon. g6. Now f5. So it looks as though what has white done? He's just lost his centre pawn. And black's got an iron grip on e4. Okay, he's going to win the exchange, but it seems under not very favourable circumstances here, with another centre pawn coming to the centre from the f-file, which means we've got a central pawn roller here. Look at these pawns potentially coming forward. This armada of pawns in the centre. So even though white's the exchange up, he looks to be facing tremendous pawn mobility now after d5. So d4 imminent threat alert. So c takes d, e takes d. So we've got these menacing pawns with d4 as an immediate threat to win a piece. It seems, which is used now. But no, there's bishop f4 attacking the queen. Even so, queen c8, and you know f5 doesn't really want to drop here because you've got the king as a target soon after f5. So he does lose that f5 pawn. Bishop g3, and he loses another pawn. And it's looking pretty grim to lose two pawns like that, actually. So black is now like 3 pawns up for the exchange. And as we know from previous games, that's bad news actually, to be having that sort of compensation for being exchanged down, usually. So knight f4, queen f7, just keeping control of key squares here. And it looks pretty grim. g5, driving the knight back. Where does the knight go? It went here and allowing d3, and here white resigned. That looks pretty grim game actually. But where could the knight have gone instead of e2? If it goes here, I wonder. Maybe just queen e6 looks good here. Just eyeing h3. Because then if knight f2, there's e3, and then there's queen e4s later on this time. It looks pretty bad. Sorry, someone's saying queen e5, queen d5. You mean? Do you mean queen d5? That's pretty good as well, isn't it? Queen d5 for e3, just to mate white on the diagonal. Yeah. So in the game, so that was a strange game, wasn't it? The way white was knocked out with an exchange sack in the centre. Let's rewind that. Let's go over that again. An overview and summary of this game. So Sicilian defence with a difference that black Petrosian found a positional route in this game. His king safety was never under real question here. He's masterfully using this capture to think about an exchange sack possibility. This rook at the moment, although it was blocked on the c file, this rerouting manoeuvre to be able to sack on e4 is interesting. So it's all about undermining the white centre. He knocks out e4, and white's just going downhill because white's g4 g5 is weakening these key squares. That's the problem with such a hack attack. It's weakening white's own king, and h6 is threatening to strip open even more lines. Hg, then d5. The queen will be on here potentially. So white's just left with a lot of weak pawns which aren't particularly useful. Black's king safety never really in question, and the central pawn mobility, like we've seen in many Petrosian game examples, especially like last week there were some examples as well. The pawn mobility is key now, once the exchange down, to further increasing the advantage. So he's collecting more pawns anyway after queen d7, or queen c8 rather. So he's collecting 2 more pawns there, and it's fairly hopeless after g5. Okay, so that was another interesting game. Let's have a look at another game example. Oh, this is a quick one, which may end our session this week. This is a relatively short game. It's a miniature. A miniature is less. Sorry, I don't want to spoil the story. So I've said too much already. I'll spoil the story of the game. Okay. Petrosian was played white, and he plays knight f3, Reti c4. And we get a queen's gambit declined, and he plays, now it was Slav transposition, and he plays c takes d exchange Slav, but with a difference. He plays a seemingly very attacking move here actually, queen c2. So queen c2, well, it deprives, it stops black playing bishop f5 of course, and it might indicate that maybe white's going to try and castle queenside in this game. After bishop d6, bishop g5, castles, e3, and now we see the move bishop g4, which might not be that good because of white's next move, knight e5, threatening to just take that bishop, and bishop takes is not possible because of this pin. So the bishop goes to h5. And then we see f4, and it looks as though this knight's very nicely perched on e5, reinforced. It's like a stone wall with a difference. This bishop is outside of the pawn chain, so it's a nice stone wall in reverse, this position. You might argue, well, what if white's weaknesses on the light squares? Can they not be exploited? Well, maybe, you know, knight takes might be on the cards of bishop g6. Black played queen a5. Bishop d3, and you know, black's not minding the double pawns because he's thinking, you know, maybe he can get rid of this knight if the pawn's on f6, and if that knight moves, we've got frontal pressure on this backward pawn on the semi-open e file. So h6 inviting that possibility. Can Petrosian put a spanner in the works here positionally? He doesn't want to just be tied down on the e file facing e file pressure. He does take on f6, but he refuses to move that knight. He just plays in this position. g4. g4. Why not? It's supported by the knight on e5 for the last moment here, needed, before the knight disappears now. So f takes e5. And not g takes e5, g takes h5, but rather attacking both bishops now with f takes e5, leaving both bishops attacked. So this looks to have gone wrong for black, because look at black's king. It looks a bit scary. His king's a bit fractured. White castles queenside, leaving the bishop if it wanted to try and go back. But of course bishop g6 looks horrible with the queen coming in. So black's in real trouble, and he doesn't want to play bishop g4. You know, the king is going to pick up that bishop. So he plays bishop g5. G takes h5. It looks like slaughter time for the black king here. Queen f2. And now there's an immediate threat of queen f5. Mating on h7. So this wasn't a very pleasant game for black. He has to try and parry queen f5. He plays f5. But now a forcing move, horrible forcing move, h4, evicting the bishop. And now the weakness of the last move is queen f4 now is possible, hitting h6. And here, black resigned. There's no real defence, it seems, to defend h6. Especially with this g file ripped open. So black's attack never got started on the queen side. So that was a bit of a vicious game to finish off this week's session. Let's have a quick look at that again. This game. So something went horribly wrong for black in this game. Basically, I think bishop g4 is one of the culprits here, allowing white to have a monstrous knight on e5. And a very dangerous position here, where instead of retreating the knight, which would have been a standard sort of move, now he plays the energetic g4, and it just smashes the black king to bits, basically, this g4 move. So, doesn't mind being temporarily a piece down. Black's king safety is just gone here. Okay, so that was a very attacking little mini game from Tigran 1950 Moscow tournament. I hope you enjoyed this week. I hope you got something from these games. Any comments or questions? I'll be here for the next couple of minutes. The video for this session will be on YouTube soon, so that's youtube.com Kingscrusher. If you want to check later, you'll see this video of this session on youtube.com Kingscrusher, or it will be on the server here along with all the past radio shows. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Thanks, Cablex. Thanks. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, there. Yep. Thanks, Albino. Thanks, Farchess. Probably, maybe we could go back to Tal next week or some other player. I haven't thought of it at the moment. Okay. Thanks so much.